Is this Tamron 28-75mm f2.8 lens still worth it after the $80 increase? Watch to hear what I have to say right after this intro. What's up guys, welcome back to another one of my videos. If you're new to my channel, click that subscribe or follow button real quick. I'm going to be dropping one video a week talking about business tips, camera gear, reviews, and everything in between. So diving back into the topic, is this Tamron 28-75mm lens still worth it? So about a year ago, this Tamron lens dropped on B&H for pre-order in April of 2018. I put in my order right away because I knew this lens was going to be something I needed in my camera bag. And after looking at all the specs on this Tamron lens, I pulled the trigger and put in my pre-order right away because I didn't have a versatile zoom lens. And now that I've been using it for about a year now, I'm going to give you my honest feedback. I'll also be showing you B-roll clips of shots I've shot with this lens in the past with all my clients. So I'm going to list a few pros, cons, and concerns about what everyone's talking about the Tamron lens, the hype, and all the negative comments about it as well. And for some of the specs, I'll also be comparing it to the specs of the 24-70 Sony G Master. So this lens is currently priced at $879, which is a steal to me still, even though it launched at $799 with only an $80 increase. It's definitely worth it if you want to compare it to the 24-70 G Master, which is currently $2,198. So comparing those two prices, this lens is approximately $1,300 cheaper than the G Master. The second pro, which sold me the most, would be this lens is super lightweight and it's only roughly 19.4 ounces compared to the 24-70 G Master, which is 1.94 pounds. What's great about having a lightweight lens is if you use gimbals a lot, which I do, I use a Zhiyun Crane 2. For most of my productions, I'm carrying that around for a couple hours during the day. And I'm always running and gutting, so having the lightest weight setup is key for me. The third pro for me is the aperture range of this lens is f2.8 to f22. For an $879 lens, and it's an f2.8, that right there is also a no-brainer for me because for that price range at around $880, you can't find an f2.8 lens that could beat this lens for Sony. The fourth pro is that it is a zoom lens, which means it zooms from 28mm all the way up to 75mm at the tele end. So at the wide end, it's at 28, and at the tele end or telephoto end, it's at 75mm. So if I had one camera lens in my bag, this would be it, because if I needed to get a relatively wide shot, I'd be shooting at 28mm, and if I need a tighter shot for any reason, I could zoom in all the way to 75mm. Last, this lens is amazing in autofocus mode. If you use that a lot, I personally use autofocus a lot, so with the new firmware update, I created a video on that if you guys want to click that link above. I talk about the firmware update. I did the 2.0 firmware update. There's actually a new firmware update, the 3.0, which I actually haven't done yet, but I'm going to probably. I just didn't want to mess with the lens if it didn't needed to be messed with. But in that video, I showed you guys a couple different tests of the autofocus of how it used to be about a year ago and how it currently is performing now. And in some situations, I did use the 24-70 G Master before. A handful of times I rented it out for multiple shoots, and in some circumstances, I believe the Tamron performed way better than the G Master. But a concern of the autofocus is its capabilities to perform well in low light situations. I personally experienced some situations where it was still relatively hunting for focus, but it was still performing really well. Nothing unbearable, but just something to keep in mind if you are going to be shooting a lot in low light situations. Maybe have an artificial light source with you, or you just have to know your lens and how it will perform in the current situation you will be in. So moving on to the cons about the Tamron 28-75mm lens. Number one would be the topic of this video, and that is an $80 increase from what it used to be, $799 up to $879. For me personally, I don't see that as a con. That's only an $80 increase, and if you already invested in a camera body from Sony, they're $1,000 to $2,000 to even $4,000. And if you already spent that much on a camera body, an extra $80 to invest in a phenomenal lens shouldn't be an issue for you. And if that extra $80 is an issue for you, you're probably more of a hobbyist, which is all right. But if you do this full-time as a career or even part-time, you want to invest in the most practical and best lens for what you do as a filmmaker or videographer or just a content creator. The next con would be how this lens does not have image stabilization built in. For me personally, I don't find that as a huge issue because Tamron dropped this lens at a phenomenal price range, and the build of it and the quality of it for how light it is, I didn't really expect it to have image stabilization. I'm usually using this setup right here on my Xeon Crane 2, and that is far more stabilization than I need, and the extra stabilization in this lens would have been quite nice, but is not something I need personally. All right, so the biggest concern with this lens is the 28mm focal length at the wide end. A lot of people like to compare it to the 24-70G Master, comparing the 24mm to the 28mm. So losing the extra 4mm in the wide end and the Tamron lens being at 28, it doesn't really bother me because you gain an extra 5mm at the tele end or telephoto end. This is a perfect focal length for everything that I shoot. But if you were shooting more landscape or let's say real estate, the extra 4mm at the wide end would have been quite nice. But even if you're shooting that type of content, you'd probably want something way wider, like a 16 or 18mm lens. And in my setup, I do have the Zeiss 18mm f2.8 that I'm currently shooting this YouTube video or IGTV video on, and that is my widest lens I have, and it satisfies everything that I do when I do need that wide lens. But for the most part, I use this 28-75mm every single day, and it's always stuck on my a7 III. But a situation where I would have preferred the 24mm focal length over this 28mm would be, a lot of content I shoot would be for clients who like to shoot their own YouTube videos but optimize it for IGTV. And for IGTV, I have to crop into a 1080 by 1920 dimension. And when I crop that in, the 28mm seems to be too close if I'm in an environment where I can't take that extra 2 or 3 steps back. For example, if I'm shooting my client in his car and he's driving while I'm in the passenger seat, I can't take that extra 2 steps backwards. And at 28mm, it gets it all in frame, but it fills up pretty much the whole frame if I'm optimizing that video for IGTV. So having that extra 4mm of focal length would have been perfect, but it's not something necessarily needed. But overall for me, the 28mm gets the job done in that situation, and the 24 would have been nice, but the 28 still gets the job done. Another concern, which might not really be concern, but something that I got used to, would be that the focusing ring is swapped with the zoom ring. So on the G Master, for example, this part right here would be the focusing ring, and this right here would be the zoom ring. This was something that I had to get used to, and I adapted to it after a couple weeks, and it's not a huge issue for me because I hardly use manual focus, and when I do, it only takes a few seconds to remember that it's swapped, and it's no problem at all. That's a wrap for this video, guys. So let me know if you would still cop this lens if you haven't already, even if Tamron bumped up the price $80. But if you already have this lens, which I know most of you guys do who follow me, let me know below what's your experience using it so far. And if you do have this lens, you already know that Tamron just announced that they're going to be dropping the 17-28mm f2.8 zoom lens as well. So share me your thoughts below. I love to chat with you guys because I know for me, I was thinking about getting the 16-35mm G Master, but Since that lens just got announced, I'm definitely jumping on that one too. And again, if you haven't already, click that subscribe button if you found a lot of value through this video. Follow me on Instagram at Gordon Lee. So after watching this video, if you don't have the Tamron lens already and I sold you on it, you could cop that right in the description right down below. There should be some stock left, but I'm not sure, so just check that link out to double check. But I recommend this lens to every single person that reaches out and asks me what's the best video lens for Sony, or if they're a7 III user, what's the best lens to have. 100% of the time, I always tell them to get this lens right here. But I appreciate you guys watching this video all the way through, and I'll catch you guys on the next video, fam.